Welcome back to talkSPORT Driving, where we dig into all the biggest talking points in Formula One and beyond. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and click the bell icon to stay right up to date. As we approach the end of the Formula One season, there's still drama and controversy to discuss, as the penultimate race in Qatar gave us plenty of spicy moments, despite there not being quite as much on the line as there was in Las Vegas. Max Verstappen, who has already secured the Drivers' Championship last week in Vegas, claimed first place in a race full of penalties and safety cars, most notably for McLaren's Lando Norris. Joining me now to dive into everything from Qatar is talkSPORT driving reporter John Jackson. John, with the Drivers' Championship already wrapped up and the nature of this track, some were expecting the race in Qatar to be lacking in excitement, but that wasn't the case, was it?
Yeah, what was set to be quite a dull race actually turned into quite an exciting race for many different reasons. We'll get onto the penalties in a second, but first of all, we may see a new rivalry in Formula One. You've probably seen across the weekend that Max Verstappen was not very happy with George Russell. This all stemmed from qualifying for the Grand Prix, where Max Verstappen was deemed to have gone too slowly on one of his cool-down laps. Now, George Russell came around the corner. I've seen the onboard video. I mean, it looked a bit tricky. He had to go a little bit wide to avoid Max. But both of these drivers were on cool-down laps. They weren't doing a fast lap. They weren't trying to set a lap time for qualifying. However, Max Verstappen, after qualifying on pole position, he then got a one-place grid penalty, which seems a little bit harsh, but he started second, and that lit the fire inside Max Verstappen, and he was just adamant that he was going to get past George Russell straight away in the Grand Prix. And look what happened. He did just that. He went on to win the race. A great drive from Max Verstappen. But afterwards, the comments were really telling from Max Verstappen, where he was discussing what happened when they went to speak with the stewards. And the quote from Max Verstappen is, he's never seen someone trying to screw someone over that hard. Speaking about George Russell, of course, who looks like a kind of polite and calm guy, but let's face it, all 20 drivers on the grid are fearsome racers and they all want to win the race. So any kind of possible edge they can get, they will exploit it. We actually saw it from Max in the race when he was asking for Lando Norris to be looked into for a penalty, which we'll get onto in just a second. But yeah, we're seeing a big war of words straight after the race from the side of Max Verstappen aimed at George Russell. I mean, maybe it's something we need in 2025. We need a new rivalry, and maybe it's George Russell versus Max Verstappen all along. We were looking in the wrong place. Maybe it isn't Lando Norris. It's actually the Mercedes driver.
There were plenty of controversies around penalties again, and the FIA have released a statement to explain a few things. But what's your take on these penalties? Were some of them too harsh?
First thing I'll say is there was a lot of snitching going on from drivers on other drivers. Now, this is quite common practice in Formula One. You need to find that edge, but we did see it kind of happened quite a lot. Let's look into the first penalty of the weekend. That was the Max Verstappen one we've already briefly discussed, and that was that he was deemed to have been going too slowly in qualifying, which meant that George Russell came around the corner. He was there. It didn't really affect either of them. Neither of them were trying to set a fast time. There was no accident, there was not much danger. However, it was a one-place grid penalty, which is deemed to have been quite harsh. Now, we have to remember in recent weeks there's been a few high-level departures from the FIA, the governing body of Formula One. So we have a new race director looking after his second race, Rui Marquez, and his big decision in the race was the Lando Norris incident. So a bit of backstory on this. There was a wing mirror on the track which got smashed into by Valtteri Bottas. It was Alex Albon's wing mirror, which caused all kinds of debris across the track. We saw some punctures which may or may not have been affected by this debris, but either way, they needed to clear that up. So there's waved yellow flags while they're working out what they do, and Lando Norris is deemed to have not lifted off and gone too fast, and therefore it's a pretty, cut and dry penalty for Lando Norris. I think what's been questioned is the severity of the penalty, because it was a 10-second stop and go penalty, which is just below getting a black flag. When it says 10 seconds, it's never 10 seconds. You've still got to come into the pits and sit there for 10 seconds. So you lose around about 30 seconds time depending on which track you're at. Now, this was hugely pushed by Max Verstappen on the radio. He was very much onto the Red Bull team straight away to say that Lando Norris was definitely speeding there under the yellow flags. They lodged a complaint. They looked into it. Lando got this penalty, which affected hugely the race because Lando and Max were having a pretty good battle at this point. So that's the big one. You could say that was a very harsh punishment. Punishment was due. I think you can probably argue that Lando didn't lift off, and certainly Andrea Stella, his team principal at McLaren, backed that up. He was just questioning the severity of the penalty and the consistency of the penalty. We then also have Lewis Hamilton getting a 10-second stop-and-go penalty for speeding in the pit lane. Again, speeding in the pit lane is quite dangerous. However, they were under the safety car as they were being led through while they could clear up the main straight from the debris. So again, a little bit harsh for Lewis Hamilton, who, by the way, had a terrible weekend, wanted to retire the car. Then when they asked him to retire the car, he decided to stay out and finish at the end anyway. So there we go. One more race left for Lewis. Not going to end in a great way at Mercedes, and I'm sure he's already thinking about a bit of time off and getting on with Ferrari. But we look at all this and there was snitching galore because Lando Norris was snitching on Lewis Hamilton speeding in the pit lane. We got George Russell snitching on Max Verstappen in qualifying, and of course the main one is Max Verstappen snitching on Lando Norris to get him that 10-second stop-go penalty. All well within their rights to snitch, but it was a bit snitchy.
John, what effect did the results in Qatar have on the fight for the Constructors' Championship?
So McLaren did have a chance to wrap up the Constructors' Championship this past weekend in Qatar, but things didn't go their way, of course, with Oscar Piastri finishing third, but Lando Norris finishing down in 10th place. It meant that Ferrari actually outscored McLaren again, and Ferrari are the team in second, chasing them for this championship, with Charles Leclerc finishing second, with Carlos Sainz in fifth. So they gained a bigger points advantage, which means it all goes down to Abu Dhabi. There's a 21-point gap between Ferrari in second and McLaren in first. So it means actually for viewers, we're going to get an exciting end to the season, and nothing chaotic ever happens in Abu Dhabi, does it? So it's going to be a good one to see. I think when you're looking at the two drivers that are going into this, Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc have certainly had a few war of words last time out in Las Vegas. We didn't really see a repeat of that in Qatar last weekend, so they're very much focused, and actually I think it's going to be a really good battle there. Let's just hope that Lando Norris isn't too disheartened by what happened in the Drivers' Championship and also what happened this past weekend with that mistake speeding under the yellow flags, costing him a chance to win the race. But it's going to all come down to Abu Dhabi, and I think it's going to be a thriller.
We had an unexpected point scorer in the top 10. How surprising was that?
Finally, some points for Sauber. It's been a dismal season for them. We know that they're becoming Audi in 2026, and all eyes are pretty much on that, and they're already talking about how that's going to look, and they've got new investment this past weekend from Qatar as well, which was very timely given that the race was in Qatar. And what a great performance from Zhou Guanyu, the driver of the day, to get points and also to make up 4 places in a car that at the start of the season was way off the pace. You've seen what's happened with Alpine. They've pulled their fingers out slightly. They've made a lot of progress, whereas Sauber, who were also pretty slow to start the year, just haven't made that progress for one reason or another. I would imagine the eyes on the future is probably why. Him and Valtteri Bottas have struggled all year, haven't had a point at all. Time is running out. They've got one race left after this if they don't score points in Qatar, and then to come home 8th, score the first points of the season. If you've seen the videos of the Sauber mechanics running out of the garage to congratulate Zhou Guanyu on the pit wall, it's an absolutely magical moment, and when you think that they've already done 22 races this season without scoring a single point, you can see why they celebrated so hard. It was kind of tough for Valtteri Bottas. He had a chance of getting points as well if it wasn't for Lando Norris carving through the field to try and make his way back up and just getting past him to finish 10th ahead of Valtteri Bottas, who eventually finished 11th. But a really positive sign at the end of the year, with of course both of those drivers leaving at the end of the season, and it could be Zhou Guanyu's last race coming up this weekend in Formula 1, with a potential for Valtteri Bottas to maybe join Cadillac in 2026.
John, what can you tell us about the big news that's been confirmed since the race that Esteban Ocon has driven his last race for Alpine?
Yeah, while there was talk of maybe Lewis Hamilton stepping aside to give young Kimi Antonelli some experience before the season starts properly, Alpine have come from nowhere with this announcement that Esteban Ocon, one of their drivers who is leaving at the end of the season, will have raced his last race in Qatar. There were rumours across the paddock all weekend that this was going to be the case, and it was confirmed earlier this morning, on Monday morning, that Esteban Ocon is done with the team, where he's got his only ever race victory back in 2021 in Hungary. And Jack Doohan, the 21-year-old reserve driver who is racing in 2025 for Alpine, is stepping into the car. Oliver Oakes, who's a pretty new team principal at Alpine, was fairly tight-lipped on Sunday when he was quizzed by people, but it seems that the rumours got out, and as soon as the rumours get out, they have to confirm these things. It makes sense because you want a driver to come into a new season with as much experience as possible. You add into the fact that Jack Doohan is Australian and he will be racing for the first time, or he would have been racing for the first time in Australia, which is a lot of pressure, having seen how much attention the Australian drivers get. And obviously with Daniel Ricciardo dropping off the grid, he's only going to be one of 2 Australian drivers, if you don't count Valtteri Bottas, the token Australian due to his partner's nationality. He'll be the only one of 2 Australian drivers. He'll get so much attention. So actually it's a good thing, if you think about it, that Jack Doohan gets the nerves out of the way by racing in Abu Dhabi. What I don't quite understand with this, and this has been done to allow Esteban Ocon to do the postseason test for Haas, the team he's joining in 2025. What I don't understand so much is that Haas and Alpine are battling it out for 6th place in the championship, which might not sound like a lot, but there's a lot of money involved in finishing 6th or 7th in the championship. And at the moment, Alpine have a 5-point lead over Haas. So it's kind of tricky because you're putting a driver in who's never done a Formula 1 race before when you need to keep scoring points, because Haas have shown that they can score points. So maybe that's something that they're just willing to let go, and so be it if Jack Doohan doesn't score any points and Haas managed to pip them to 6th place. But Esteban Ocon will not be racing in Abu Dhabi. His time at Alpine is done. 5 seasons with the team, and he will move on to Haas next year. And we will get to see for the first time a little preview of 2025 with the Alpine lineup of Pierre Gasly and Jack Doohan.
Thank you, John. Looking forward to catching up again after Abu Dhabi.